Welcome to Distilled Security Podcast, Episode 8. My name's Justin. I'm here with Rick and Joe, and we have another guest on the episode here, Eddie Kubit. Thanks for joining us here.
Oh, I'm thrilled.
So you have an interesting story. You've been 20 plus years into the security industry, worked with a number of different security vendors and everything, and you recently made a career change. Can you tell us a little bit?
I would love to, right? Because it's when I told close friends, they're like, "You did what?" Right? I have a history, right, or career in IT security sales, right?
What
most
got you into
recently,
that, by the way?
Security sales?
Yeah, or security in general.
Yeah. Like back, way back, right? I got more gray hairs than anybody here, I think. Way back when I had an engineering degree, an electrical engineering degree, and I started writing code for a company, hated it, right? And so I went and then got an executive MBA from Waynesburg and got in touch with some consulting organizations. And I'm like, boy, working with customers and being outside fit my personality a whole lot more than sitting behind a desk and writing code, right?
Gotcha.
And so then I took a job in sales for a security reseller, and then in the industry. I've worked for Checkpoint for quite a while, short term with Cisco and Archer, and then most recently my career has been with Imperva.
Okay.
And then most recently D3, right? And it's been wonderfully productive for me. I was able to send 3 kids through college. One's still in college, but we're still working on that.
The track record's going good with them, right?
yeah. And it was wonderfully, productive, like and fulfilling, like I said. But it got to a point where, for me, there was like the take your kid to work day, right? And my daughter one time back, and this a few years back, said, well, all Dad does is sit on the keyboard, the PC, and send emails and talk to people on the phone. How boring can that possibly be, right? And she had a point, but then there's also this thing where you describe your job in 1 sentence or less, right? And so I figured out the best way to describe my career as a salesperson. I badgered people until they signed a contract.
Oh.
I mean,
fair enough.
Yeah, anybody.
Right? And I know there's a whole lot more to it, right?
Yeah.
But to me, there was little nobility. There was little things that I was proud of when I went home, other than, hey, I closed a big deal and it enriched Aussie and the company, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I was let go. And so I had always planned on and thought of, once my kids were all through college, my youngest is still at Duquesne, but once my kids were through college, I wanted to build something. I wanted to make something and do something, right? Rather than just send emails and phone and voicemails, right? And I've always had a passion for and an interest in distilled spirits.
Yeah.
So I went to elementary school.
You're on the right podcast, by the way.
I'm sorry?
You're on the right podcast.
This is why when it happened, I said to Justin, hey, I'd like to join you guys one time, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I went to elementary school at Our Lady of Grace, which is a parochial school in Scott Township. And there was always this one of those blue historic landmarks on top of the hill. And I was curious, so I walked up there one day, and it happened to be the location of General John Neville's home that was burned down to start the Whiskey Rebellion, right? And it was Bower Hill. Oh, yeah. And I started scratching my head because it was parochial school. Nobody talked about whiskey.
They say your interest in spirits started in elementary school.
Yeah, but, and like the parochial school, so it wasn't supported, right, as a career goal for.
Must have been a rough elementary school.
But relaxing.
Yeah, right.
And I had always had an interest in the local history of the Whiskey Rebellion and and other things. And this area, like West PA, is steeped in history of alcohol or like distilled spirits production. And you guys can, I'm sure you have heard that, but
a ton before the Prohibition, and then
absolutely, absolutely. And we can talk about that. But in the Whiskey Rebellion, that story is told very well by a number of distillers that are here. They do a very nice job. But at any rate, so I got very interested in reading and history of the area that I grew up in. So fast forward a little bit, and I've done some brewing and some winemaking, and may or may not have done a little bit of moonshining or whatever it might be, and always had an interest.
Off the record.
Always had an interest in the distilled spirits, right? And so I actually wrote a couple of business plans together, and what would it take? Because my idea when I said to, that after my kids were through college, I would love to have a small distillery.
Yeah.
Right? And, so I did a business plan together, and the lowest number I could come up with was $1.5 million.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm sure you guys can appreciate that. A distillery is a fantastically difficult business.
Right.
Because to do a bourbon, right? Not only do you have to make it, but you have to age it, mature it. So it's 4 years, 5 years before you have revenue, right? So it's a very difficult thing to do, right? So at any rate, fast forward to earlier this year. And my employer, not so ceremoniously, told me I no longer had a job, right?
Fair enough.
And I'm not special in this area, but my wife encouraged me. She said, "Well, you always talked about doing something, right? So here's your chance."
Yeah, now's the time.
And
That's
I
a good
gave
wife.
absolutely. She's I said I'm like the wobbly wheel on the grocery cart of our marriage. My wife has kept us moving forward
that's
the
so
whole time, right?
fantastic.
And she's like, "Well, you've always talked about doing something. I have every excuse that I could come up with. Look, our kids aren't out of college yet." She says, the 529 money's there, or retirement. She goes, we've got plenty of retirement, and all everything that I could come up with. She goes, and then she actually found, and I think we were talking about this earlier. There's a Point Bar College has a certificate program for brewing sciences, right? And
I sent that to you. Remember when I found that?
yeah. So earlier this summer, they did the first Distilling 101 class.
Okay.
Right. And so my wife sent it to me and said, here, you should be interested in this class. And again, I gave her every excuse there was, and she was like, I don't want to hear about it, right? You either do it or shut your mouth, right? And shut up. So I took this class, and it was fantastic. So it was 10 weeks, 2 lectures per week, like 3 hours. We started mostly going to Point Park downtown.
Sure.
But the instructor is Matt Strickland, who's the master distiller at Iron City Distilling. And before long, we were going out to the distillery for class because it was way more interesting to everybody, and it was way easier to actually see the equipment being used, right? And so we spent the second half of the class really at Iron City Distilling, and I got to know the team there. Got to know some of the management. Excuse me. And, pieces just kind of fell into place, to be quite honest with you. It was quite remarkable looking back on it. But at first, there was a part-time job that came up for doing tours.
Yeah.
And again, I was idle, so I'm like, sure, I'll do.
I get to hang out here.
Tours.
This is great.
Yeah.
And then, then there's like, hey, a full-time job production role came up. Would you be interested? And I'm like, heck yeah. Because actually, at the beginning of the new year, we're actually going to expand production and go, instead of 6 mashes per week, 8, right? So we can get into that. But we're going to need more coverage for weekends and whatnot. And so just interviewed with the team and the guys, got to know everybody, and things fell into place. And I actually was able to, was fortunate to fall into almost the position of a distiller at Iron City Distilling.
And they pay you for this?
They pay me to make whiskey, dude. Really? I'm serious. It's the greatest thing ever. I describe it. It's like physically the hardest work I do I've ever done, right? Because again, I've sent emails and made phone calls, right?
But sometimes there are aggressive emails that you have to really force it.
You can hurt your fingers typing so hard.
The hours are tough. I got to be out in Creighton at 6 a.m. But it's a joy for me to actually know the process, and not only just knowing the process, right? Because you can know the process for making whiskey, but then you have the machinery, right? And one wrong valve, and you can spill out 1,500 gallons of whiskey onto the floor, right? So there's a whole lot to know about the process, and I'm the lowest level. I'm the newest of the team there, but I'm telling you, I'm just lucky to have fallen in with the best distilling team in Pennsylvania for sure, if not this part of the country.
That's awesome. And the facility's gorgeous too.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I grew up right around there, and it is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to just say that one of the unique thing about Iron City Distilling is they're doing it right. Like a lot of young distillers make that kind of, the quick vodkas or something like that, or
the
the
flavored
flavored stuff and everything. You're doing it where you're sitting on it for 4, 5, 6 years. Have you produced one drop yet out of... I think this is Matt's, right?
This is Matt Strickland's, Distiller's Reserve is stuff that Matt had distilled at his previous employers.
Previous employment.
That was purchased by Iron
I
City
guess your
Distilling.
gin you're doing.
The gin we're making right
making,
now. And we're selling that commercially, but only at the store, right?
Okay.
We have nothing on the store
it's not on any shelves.
Yeah.
It is good gin. I did like
It's
the gin.
fantastic.
Yeah,
You
it
know
was
the
good,
difference between what Matt does with the gin? So instead of that, a lot of people don't like that juniper punch.
Oh, yeah.
And it's still juniper forward, but we use lemon drop hops.
Oh, that's right.
So give it more of that citrus, almost a floral aspect to
really
it, which is
nice.
kind of gorgeous and makes an awesome martini. But you're right. So, the management and ownership of Iron City Brewing and Iron City Distilling, right, decided that, we're going to be a national brand. We're going to be a top brand. We're going to be a top quality product when we put it on the shelf, right? So we're
Which
doing
is different. Like,
Yeah.
because it takes a lot of time.
It's again,
and that's
like I
money
said earlier,
sitting on the shelves.
it's a difficult it's a difficult business to be successful at,
Yeah.
right? So that's why you'll see, some people selling moonshine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have to.
But
get
you
revenue.
understand trying to get the revenue, but then you kind of potentially ruin the brand, or at least,
when you have less juice to put into barrels.
Right, exactly.
Like,
So yeah, you come out with not a great product at the start, and it's hard to get then ahead to get reoccurring customers
No question.
and all that
No,
stuff. and everything.
without question, right?
Yeah.
So we are now, and you wouldn't know it because we don't have any product on the shelf, but we're putting more whiskey in barrels than anybody else in Pennsylvania for sure.
Yeah.
We're putting up at least between like 35 and 50 barrels per week.
Yeah.
So that's like 1,200 to 1,500 gallons of whiskey per week. We have 2,040 was the barrel that we just put up today. So we have
Wow.
2,040 barrels of distilled spirits just aging away at
That's
that
cool.
at that location
Yeah.
right now, right?
And correct me if I'm wrong. Your first barrel that you're going to bottle was at the end of 2025, aiming for.
Oh, yeah. So there are, and we're regularly taking a look at how things are aging, right?
Right.
So it will be a rye whiskey, and it will be because rye ages a little bit faster than the corn liquor to make bourbon, right?
know
And
that.
so there are a couple of barrels that are aging real nicely, right? And so we're really hoping that by holiday time next year, so like October of 2025, you'll be able to see Iron City Distill. It's probably the brand won't be Iron City, but you'll be able to see
the bottles
product
on the shelves.
bottles
Yeah.
on the shelf. Yeah,
That'd be awesome.
yeah.
because one of their decisions about not being Iron City as the brand was that we want to be a national brand,
Okay.
not a Pittsburgh brand,
Right.
Proud of Pittsburgh heritage,
Yeah, absolutely.
but don't want to. If you're in Philadelphia, you're going to buy Iron City whiskey, right? When you
So
got
it's
to, you
coming
got
out
other options.
in a different brand. Interesting.
Yeah.
What's the brand? Do you know?
You know?
I was told by my management that we have full. Yes, I do know. It's gonna be called Bessemer.
Oh, clever. I like
Bessemer.
that.
See,
Why is that clever? I don't know.
Still local tied.
The Bessemer is the process for making steel, right? But it's
okay.
a softer, it's round, it's more approachable
Yeah, I
than
like that.
old iron or some of the other options that we have.
It's funny.
yeah.
Just at the restaurant I was at before I came here, there were two guys sitting at a table, and they had a Bessemer shirt on.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it's funny you said that.
I like that.
Very cool. And so, and the one thing, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, you just got a new still as well.
Oh yeah.
Very unique still.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up because that is actually another one of the things that's going to make Iron City Distilling very unique. Is that, and again, the story of the Whiskey Rebellion has been told by a number, and they do it very well, right? And folks that do that make a fine rye whiskey, very good rye whiskey, right? But Matt Strickland, the master distiller, said we're going to tell a different story, right? And so we're going to celebrate the heyday of rye whiskey production in Western Pennsylvania, right from like
I was
1840
gonna say the
to
before
Prohibition.
times. Yeah.
Right, where rye whiskey, Monongahela rye, Pennsylvania rye was the top dog on the shelves, right? And I can't quantify that this ever happened, but I like to think that there was some Civil War, generals or people after they went into the saloon and they're like, I want the top shelf stuff that you have, and that's the Pennsylvania rye, right? Or Pony Express rider out west, wanting the best stuff that they had, which at the time literally would have been Monongahela rye or rye whiskey produced from this era. So and I'll get to the question that you asked. So we are going to make the most authentic traditional rye whiskey, Western Pennsylvania rye whiskey that's ever been produced. So what do you mean? What do you mean by saying that, Eddie, right? So we are actually we buy a very large amount of Rosen rye, which is the brand of rye grain. Rosen was a variety of rye grain that was typical at the time. And it was, how do I want to say it? There was a scientist, she was able to recreate and reconstitute what
It was like the Jurassic Park story, but like with rye.
And so she has
So
license
not
on
going to
it.
turn on you at any point. Got it.
And like we're like the farmer that we buy our grain from in Bedford. He has like 500 acres, and we're buying 480 of
awesome.
the Rosen rye, right?
Yeah.
So the traditional rye.
So why not the 20 left?
Oh, he has a homestead.
The farmer's got to make
Just
money.
because you
for
can,
people as well, right?
should you?
So the rye grain, right? Then the other thing we're doing, and by the way, think about this: the Rosen rye that we're buying, it's like 70 cents a pound, whereas the corn for bourbon distillers is gonna be like 7 cents, right? So we're making a premium product. That's what I'm getting at with talking about money. And then the other piece is we mash it kind of the same. Ferment there's no special process with fermenting, but we are distilling that rosin rye on a chamber still, right? So specifically, we have a 3-chamber still, which was typical for the area of the time, but fell out of favor. And we're starting to learn the reasons why it might have fallen out of favor. Very particular.
Like as you work with it?
Much harder to work with than a pot still, right? Pot still, you just heat it up and boil the alcohol off, right? The chamber still, and ours is a 3-chamber still. And you're only really taking alcohol vapor off the top chamber, and then you take what was left after the run, put it to the next chamber, and then to the bottom chamber, which is the one that's heated, and then the stuff like filters up through the chambers, right? It's all under pressure, but what that does, it allows us to extract a lot of those gorgeous oils out of the rye grain, right? That you wouldn't get at atmospheric pressure or whatever. So even the new make spirit, the stuff that I love, that we would call moonshine, right? You can smell the difference as soon as you walk in the building, whether we're running the chamber still or the pot still.
That's cool.
So we're gonna take the rosin rye on the chamber still, and it's gorgeous, by the way. Somebody asked me, like, well, when I do tours, they're like, well, why copper for a still, right? And there are a couple of practical reasons. It's fantastic for heat distribution, right? It also has anti-sulfur, pulls sulfur out of the distillate, and it also looks like $1 million.
That's so cool.
And I think that's
you
the
got it
best
by
reason.
Vendome. You got it at like, which is like the number one still maker.
All Vendome gear in our distillery.
Antibacterial
Did we see
too, I'm pretty
one
sure.
of those on the tour in a chamber still on a tour at all?
Because how many are
There's 3 in production.
Really?
That we know
in
of,
the
right?
entire world?
That we know of, right? There may be others, some smaller ones, but one is out in Colorado, Leopold Brothers. Again, I don't mind sharing other information. One is a rum
that's
distiller in the Caribbean.
Common knowledge.
Yeah.
Common.
And Todd Leopold was the guy that was doing some research and reading.
Right.
That like, hey, what is it about these chamber stills, right? And why were they popular then and not popular now? So he was the first one to commission the production of a chamber still from Vendome. And it is a gorgeous piece of equipment, right? So we had there's actually another one in the Caribbean producing rum. And then we have the third that's in production making whiskey now. There are a couple that are under contract that they're making.
Right.
So we're getting a lot of calls from other distillers that want to see the chamber still
There
in
was
action.
one at the opening of your 3-chamber still and everything that was up at there.
So you can see this on the tour?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's right in the floor there.
Hey, you
And
heard it here.
Yeah,
Breaking
absolutely.
news on the name, and go see it.
If you're there, yell my name out, and I'll come down and I'll give you the extra special tour, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's phenomenal. Like I went for the opening, and it's just a beauty, type of thing. And it's
gorgeous.
It's not cheap. I heard a number that each one of the chambers were like $200K from Vendome. So all in told,
Yeah, that I don't know. They're 200 gallons for sure. I know that.
I thought
for sure.
it was
2, 4, 6. That's probably about right.
it was like 800-900K for the whole thing.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not writing
again,
those checks, but
again, going to sparing no expense, type of thing. Like you guys are investing so much into the quality of product,
Yes, of course. And then it's all steam heated, by the way, too. Which adds to the complexity and valves and gears you have to turn to do everything, right? But again, the distillate that comes out of it is just gorgeous. It smells fantastic. So then, after we distill everything, we take everything to our rick house, which is it's all hickory, right? And steam heated, which was the way that rick houses were built back in that 1850 to Prohibition day. And we are barreling that rosin rye from the 3-chamber still in 40-gallon barrels. Again, it was the way that it was done by the way, at a low proof.
And what are the other gallon barrels that?
It's
usually 53.
Okay.
So all of our Danko rye and our bourbon, all the single malt we can get into are just all sorts of different things. We have all kinds of different barrels that we bring in, but generally about 53 gallons. So a 53-gallon barrel weighs about 100 pounds, and we put about 400 pounds of liquid in it and put it on the rack.
Lift it up to the roof.
So when you walk through a rick house, think about it. Every one of those things weighs 500 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what we're getting at. Oh, so getting back to the traditional and the authentic Monongahela or West PA rye whiskey that we're making, in a rick house in 40-gallon barrels at a low entry proof, like 50.5 is the entry proof that we're putting stuff into new oak barrels, right?
Okay.
So I talked about the cost of the grain.
Yeah.
the cost of the still that you brought up, steam heat, and 40-gallon barrels at low entry proof, right? Yeah. So again, all leading to the point
and
of
the manual effort going into it. Yeah,
is all going to be. It's going to be a premium product. I'm convinced that.
So $10 a bottle.
Yeah,
sure.
that's what I'm hearing. You heard it here.
It's not going to be crazy, but it's going to be a premium spirit for sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
It'll
I can't
cost
wait.
less for us since it's local.
Yeah. And you sponsor.
What do they say that? I heard a quote, I don't know who said it, so I can't give appropriate credit. But somebody said when you buy a craft whiskey or a craft spirit, it's costly, right? But if you buy an allocated bourbon and pay way too much for it, that's expensive.
Yeah. But I mean, it is there is something truthful about like if you don't have to ship a thing across the country, right? That helps sometimes, especially when it's liquid in bottles, notoriously heavy.
Yeah.
So
eventually that'll be your goal. Like obviously, once you start getting the production.
You said national.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
national.
for sure.
Yeah,
we're putting like I mentioned to you a lot of liquid in barrels.
That's
so
exciting.
they're more than we could sell here locally.
So in the Rick House,
Yes.
and I remember things from the tour in Kentucky I went on. So the climate, the fluctuations in climate, how does it compare here in Pennsylvania to what people are maybe getting?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And first of all, I want to talk about when we talk about whiskey or bourbon, I as a distiller would like to say maturing rather than aging because it's not just sitting in a barrel for a while. We're pulling out a lot of like tannins and like some other stuff from the wood itself. So our rick house, for example, we try to keep it at 80 degrees steam heat. There's big garage doors and doors, so people open them up and it cools off all the time. But we try to keep it constant temperature all year round. And 80 degrees on the floor, it's probably about 15 degrees hotter as you go up, right? So when we're racking at the top level, it's 90 degrees up there for sure. But we try to keep it at a constant temperature. It's a brick building, so the coefficient of whatever insulation is very poor. But we try to keep it at that steady rather than allowing it to get cold and then get hot in the summertime, right? And then cold again in this, because I've read about pulls the liquid out of the barrel and then in the wood and then pushes it back in. I'm not so sure that that's true and that's what's going on during the maturation of spirit in a barrel. But at any rate, so the question that you asked, we keep it at a constant temperature or try to at least, right, to mature the whiskey that's in the barrels.
Yeah.
And some of the older rick houses, they're like wide open to the elements, even though they might be steamed and everything. I think we were at Buffalo Trace. They had some of the old like steam stuff, but it's also wide open to the elements, through that and everything.
Yeah, and they do that thing where they're like, oh, this area produces the best barrels, and there's something to that, right? I don't know what it is. There's other distillers that know a whole lot more about
barrel
it.
select, but I thought there was always a science if you're trying to get like the same, like a Buffalo Trace type of thing. They take it from all over the warehouse to get the right blend to that.
Right, because you don't want to have a glass and enjoy it, then buy that brand again, and then like, oh, this isn't what I remember.
Right. Unless it's like barrel select, barrel proof, whatever it is, type of thing.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's very cool.
That's awesome, man. Really exciting.
Yeah.
Plug for the place. Where's it located, and what are the hours that people can come on tours, and do they need to call ahead?
Yeah, that's great. So there are public tours, and we just expanded tours, so it's Thursday through Sunday. Times vary. It's like 1 p.m. through 6 p.m., I think. They're all available on the website, Iron City Distilling, I believe. In Creighton, Pennsylvania. You asked where we are. So Creighton is north of Harmarville, south of New Kensington. If you live out that way, you've probably driven through and seen the beautiful brand new facility with Iron City Brewing. And
just right off the 28 there.
Yeah.
Very close to Pittsburgh Mills. If people know.
Yes. The next exit after Pittsburgh Mills, as a matter of fact. And it's a wonderful tour for the holidays coming up. If you have friends in town, a great way to kill an afternoon.
Yeah.
We'll do tastings.
Those are available on Eventbrite. You can actually go to Eventbrite and look up Iron City Distilling. And you have a number of classes like on Saturday.
Yep.
You have like a winter solstice coming up this
I think winter solstice is on Saturday.
And then,
I know my wife and sister-in-law are going to do the chocolate pairing.
Oh, yeah, it's coming
with
up.
whiskey, which if you don't realize it, chocolate pairs remarkably well with whiskey.
I've gotten some gifts before that were specially made slabs of chocolate that it even said drink it with or eat
Yep.
it with this.
Yeah, and my wife loves like dark chocolate with red wine. And very
okay.
similar type of things, the oils or something. I don't know what it does, but it pairs remarkably well. So my and Belinda, our libation specialist, she's awesome. She makes very craft cocktails, and she'll be guiding that chocolate pairings.
Awesome.
Belinda and Andrew are the bartenders that are there in the mezzanine, which the bar that you were at.
Beautiful.
Fantastic facility, not open to the public, but just through tours and events that are available online.
I heard there's goals to get that open, like wider
Yeah.
times and everything. So
Yeah, and there will be, right? So
Yeah.
there's a talk about
because you
what
just built that like a month ago or something like that. Like
Yeah.
it's really new,
and it's been
Yeah.
like one thing at a time. We just got bar
Yeah.
stools in today, so you
Okay.
had to stand at the bar. Now you can actually sit down at the bar and some of the tables.
Justin won't sit
Fancy.
anyway.
Yeah, well,
He's a standard.
Well, you sell some cool bar stools in the gift shop.
Are there, what's all over there?
It's the Iron City bar stools.
oh,
I mean, it's
yeah,
not
yeah,
exactly
yeah.
the distilling, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
gift shop has a bunch of different stuff that
Yeah.
they sell, which is very neat. So
yeah.
and we're separate from the distillery, or excuse me, from the brewery, but we're still the same company,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we get a lot, and we have a lot of cooperation from the brewers. They have a fantastic lab that we
that
we
you
can
get to,
go
like,
and utilize,
yeah, that's
like
good.
all the the lab equipment that we'll take our 2 samples a day, and they have like all kind of stuff that's going on in there, and all the things that we can utilize from those guys is terrific, and it works out really well for us. They actually do our single malt. The owner is a big fan of single malt whiskey, right? And
that's
American
cool.
single malt is now a category.
Yeah, they just actually released that.
Yeah.
It was American single malt, and I forget the other definition that they solidified.
Yeah, I don't know either, but
Yeah.
for us, per se, we were very
wow.
interested
Yeah. I
in
didn't
know
American
that.
single malt.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And we're aging our single malt in all sorts of different casks. Sauterne, the one this is bourbon, but there's cognac barrels, there's red wine. We got a bunch of red wine barrels from Stag's Leap just delivered the other day.
Oh,
They're
nice.
going to be really
Yeah.
interesting to see what happens with the single malt in those. And I was thinking of something else I wanted to share, but it's escaped me for right now. Oh, so cooperation with
yeah.
the brewery, right? So they actually have. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with the distilling process, but the mash cooker that we have, we distill on the grain. So we'll cook the grain, ferment it, and then put everything into the still, right? And then once we grain out, that only happens after it's been distilled. Right. With a single malt, traditionally you will you will take the liquid off the grain before fermenting.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? So it's a different,
Oh, really?
there's louder tons, right? So we get just a gorgeous liquid pumped over from the brewers
Oh, that's
because they have
great.
louder tons that can
Right,
spin
right,
and they can
right.
Wait a minute,
they can
explain
separate the
that?
grains.
You take the liquid off the grain before fermenting?
Yes.
Okay, so you like get all the grain out of it, filter
Yeah.
that out.
Yeah, so,
then
like-
you throw the yeast into the
Yes,
liquid.
correct.
It ferments, and then you take it out. Okay,
Yeah, if you're familiar with the
interesting.
beer making process.
Yeah.
Beer makers do that, right? Because you get the wort off of the grains before
Gotcha.
you ferment,
Okay.
right? And so it's a very similar process to doing that.
That's
And
really
since
cool that
They
you
have
get
the
the
gear to
material-
do
Yeah.
that. There's like a 2-inch line. They just pump the stuff over and we put it into a 3,000 gallon.
That's awesome.
Fermentation vessel and add yeast to it, like you said, and we distill it from there. So a little bit different to the process, but real close cooperation with the guys on the brewery side.
That's
I shouldn't
cool.
say guys, the folks on the brewery side.
Cool.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right.
You mind if we drag you into your old life for a little bit?
I have absolutely not. I'll jump in when I feel appropriate.
So going on to our next topic here. Obviously, a couple weeks ago, the United Health CEO got killed and everything. Just cold-blooded attack based on somebody who thought the insurance industry was broken and everything. And separate from that, I want to bring up and just talk about from the role of a security practitioner, CISO, whatever it may be, what is our role in protecting some of the executives? So I saw like some of the initial things that were very knee-jerky, like they started wiping bios off the website and stuff of that nature. And does that do anything? Does it not? What should we be doing? How serious of threats? Because he got some threats, but I don't think it was located to this. I'm not sure there was an actual threat based on this,
I
type of
haven't
thing.
heard that this was
Yeah.
connected to like anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So kind of curious, I mean, as you guys, are out there, have you got any questions, from this on how to handle it? What would you recommend, companies do post up the bios or not.
Yeah.
I have a couple of stories of like what we did with like some of the senior executives, specifically at Diebold. Diebold, well, I worked at BNY Mellon, but I wasn't connected to what we did for executive protection at that. I was way down in the totem pole at that point. But I know at Diebold, we did have obviously some insurance. We provided some response. Like we basically had that a team could go in if somebody got like kidnapped or something like that. A little bit of insurance along that lines. But this is domestic here. You don't think necessarily about that, protection, especially in a big city like that.
Yeah. What do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
No, you go ahead.
I mean, so I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't know. Well, you were asking about like what's the role, right? So information security, first and foremost, it's like, okay, well, if there's information about people traveling around, right? I mean, you probably want to keep that reasonably secure, right? But does keeping that secure prevent something like this? Like, well, not really. If there's a big meeting somewhere and you know that people are going to, particularly with
does it mean more remote meetings? Like,
I mean, maybe I actually don't. My take on this is probably it might not be the best one, but it is mine, so I'll own it. Which is like there are always going to be, and this is people getting murdered is like a tragedy, obviously.
Yeah.
But but to talk about it clinically for a little bit, from an information security practitioner perspective, like there are going to be isolated incidents, right? There are going to be things that happen that you don't necessarily, that no company necessarily is going to employ the resources to, do
it correctly. Yeah.
Well, to
so
eliminate,
would you say this is a black swan event?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be, right? Now, if it spawns a bunch of like copycats, okay, well now the dynamic is changing, right? There's a whole lot of socio-political stuff that goes into that. But for me right now, if I think about it truly from like an analytical risk perspective, I just don't know that the practical things that you could do to prevent something like this, like from a controls perspective or from a response perspective, are practical from a financial perspective for these organizations. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I just don't know that people are going to invest the type of money that they would need to fly everyone private forever and have, bodyguards with details and clear buildings and restaurants when they go there. Like, I mean, it's effectively a presidential detail. Yeah,
I mean, you could have a small scale one, type of thing.
You could
have a guard or two,
but again, But then, I mean, we've talked about this forever. Like, but a motivated adversary, right, with a long enough time frame, is going to do the thing that they want to do, right? Whether it's digital or physical.
Yeah, there's been some stuff I've been reading on this, and some of the knee-jerk reactions are, how do we get, and you cover some of these, how do we get the profiles off of the corporate websites? How do we start scrubbing their information from the internet?
But so much of that is theater, right? I mean, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you go to the EDGAR, the SEC EDGAR, it's all listed.
Right. It has
to be all their
executives are public information, right? And so, like, they don't have to be on the website. But again, if someone's motivated, like, I think if someone's motivated, they're going to find the people. And if they're not motivated, like, incidental contact with, the board of directors.
He had a target and
highly educated and all these things. Right.
Like, some of the stuff I was reading was even supporting that. It's like, even if he would have had all of his stuff removed, the attacker's determination, their knowledge that they had was they knew how to leverage public records. They knew the regulatory filings. They knew the OSINT tools they could use. They knew where he was going to be.
Absolutely.
And even if he didn't have a profile on the About section, and what's happening is some of the About sections of these websites that used to have,
all the
click on here
people,
for our CEO, now it's redirecting back to the main page.
I saw that as a knee-jerk reaction, and I just don't know. I don't feel like it does anything. Now, if an executive team is like, well, I'm scared and you must do something, I guess, but I would argue it's not really something.
Those are things you could do, but it's not just one thing. It's a culture of trying to begin to limit what you're putting out there. So what can you do?
So this gets into privacy.
Reasonable. So do you need to have your be careful. Don't put your wife and your kids' pictures on every single thing, and don't take all, don't be the Facebook person. Don't have it all out there. Don't be publishing, I'm going to this place for this meeting at this time, or I'll be at whatever. You have to have a little bit of a different, you're not an influencer anymore. You have to have a different profile on the internet, because that's where people might track you and know where you're at. What's that going to do? It might begin to marginally reduce some risk, but it's not going to stop the determined attacker.
Right. And I think people care about their personal brands too much. Like, I think everyone's going to individually balance this. And even if there's a knee-jerk, I'm nervous about my personal health and safety because of XYZ, I feel, I don't know, like historically with events like this, like major events, society has a pretty short memory. And I wouldn't be surprised if, now I don't know if like bios go back on websites, but again, I don't know that anyone cares either way, whether or not they're on websites, so why would it matter? But I feel like in terms of people posting and stuff, like I could imagine it's gonna like curb a little bit and then give it a year, give it 2 years or whatever. And again, assuming things haven't like changed massively and this becomes like a repeat thing, I just don't see much changing.
Yeah, I agree with you. It'll begin to stabilize. People will go back to old habits. Really, and you can't really vanish from the internet, and at the same time, it's a layered problem. So one thing's not going to change everything, and it's becoming habitual about just being careful of what you're posting and what's going out there for somebody to research, like where you're going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, you don't have to make it easy, right? But again, so many of these individuals also have these habits, right? That are like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to go to the gym every day. I'm going to do this every day at this time. I'm going to do this. Like a lot of individuals that have sort of high stress, like, days and weeks and months, they rely on their habits to help ensure that they knock out all the things. And so I also just I just can't see people changing too much because of this. I think from a human perspective, a tragedy. From a risk analytics perspective, I don't know, like every time you have a 100-year flood, do you just like not live there anymore? It's like, no, people don't do that. That's just not how it works.
Because I've been thinking about this since the things have happened, right? And I like wanting to take everything off. And while you were talking, I was thinking that, I know plenty of senior level executives that their out of work activities are, wonderfully benevolent, and they're involved in charity fundraising events and all these other things. And you want to be able to publicize that, right? Yeah. You want to be able to say, because most of the, and I have this very, I'm a capitalist at heart, and I really do believe that most companies are doing what they think is the best thing for all the stakeholders involved in their company. Sure, there are instances that you can point to in industries that are tragic, and maybe somebody didn't get this particular and whatever. But I do think that, and most of the the highest level people that I know are good people and do good things and want to celebrate that, right? And want to be able to have that on their bio from the page. And for the company, you want to be able to celebrate the wonderful things that executives are doing. So, to just have that automatically taken down, I think is a tragedy.
Yeah, but does that turn into more of a post, post-event sharing instead of a pre-event sharing? Type of thing. Like, hey, we did this charity last weekend.
But then, like, how are you going to advertise? How are you going to advertise talks? How are you going to advertise like all sorts of things? Yeah. Like, I don't think that any of the responses that would matter from a risk perspective are actually going to occur.
Well, I bet there was I agree with all that, and I bet there was a huge shoot up for these tools.
Oh yeah, I bet that's
intended.
What's that?
Who'd shoot up for these tools?
Oh, yeah.
Wording.
Yeah. I didn't mean that.
Sorry.
But a spike, exactly. But a spike in the sales of these various tools. I don't want to really
remove.me's or whatever they are. Yeah.
I seen. I got a number of questions like, how are these tools employed? Like, what do we pay for to get everything off? But a lot of it needs all the permission of those individuals to wipe it, type of thing.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, like, it'd be different if I was involved in a situation like that. But at the same time, I don't want to wipe out my LinkedIn. I've worked hard to get like my followers up and everything like that and build a social brand, because that helps me sell stuff at the end of the day. You know, for me to remove my brand from, and I don't have a huge brand, but to me to remove that, all of a sudden that sales down. You know,
Well, and anyone that's done a reasonable amount of OSINT understands that anyone is findable unless you're like super truly off the grid.
Most homes are findable. Like up to a few years ago, you could find anybody's name in the Allegheny. In fact, if you go down to the office, you can still look up anybody's name to what house. They've removed that ability off their website. You used to go to and say Mario Lemieux and see exactly his house and what he paid for it and all that stuff. Like,
there's some limited exceptions, but those exceptions are not executives that are highly connected.
Well,
at
that
the
brings up
tops of big
something I've heard
companies.
recently. I don't know if you guys heard this, but it's as soon as you can, if you're an executive and you're going to buy a new house, the tip is get an LLC, put it in place, buy it through that, because it creates another layer between the two.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a lawyer, you can do a bunch of things through your lawyers too, right?
you realize, that's just one extra like $10, $15 fee that you have to pay. You find out that that LLC owns it, then you just pay to get who's the members of that LLC from whatever state you filed that with.
But if you're an executive making the multi-million dollars a year,
you pay someone to do that for you.
Two
You can get
LLCs,
this
one
taken
LLC
care
has
of.
the other LLC.
Except add it to your lawyer's
Wyoming,
agenda.
I think you can actually do something where you hide the members with that, but that's not every state that you can hide members.
But like, then what else? You're going to get a PO box. You're going to like change your utility
You might be able
records.
to do irrevocable trust, type of thing. I don't know if that's disclosable.
There's some good books on this. I think, I wish I could remember. There's a dude that worked at Amazon, I think, for a while. That's super incredible privacy stuff. He wrote a book on it.
Yeah.
Like, there's a bunch of you can do a lot to take yourself off the grid, but it takes a ton of time and it requires a ridiculous amount of dedication. And I think the individuals that care about this specific topic the most, I just don't know that the lifestyle and the requirements of it align with those things.
Really funny. I saw a talk at DerbyCon years ago and everything, but he talked about his process of going through and buying a house with cash.
Yeah.
And keeping his name off all this stuff. And it was
a nightmare.
a process and a half.
Yeah.
Nobody's like, what do you mean you don't have a loan for this? Yeah. And
It's a nightmare.
He was talking about like keeping his name off a whole bunch of stuff. Like,
Did you bring a briefcase to the closing full of
yeah, I don't
hundreds?
know. But he did a little talk, and it was cool to listen to.
Yeah, it was fun, like the issues encountered along the way, because that's just not the typical process.
Right.
Like, we talk about like user behavioral analytics. It's like you're flagging every single thing along the way, right?
Like, what do you mean cash? Where'd you get all this
How much
cash?
fraud did you do? Like,
How much drugs did you sell to get this cash? Yeah.
So do we come up with any actual meaningful takeaways that a CISO can use when they're asked this question?
I like what you said. I think there should be training specifically for executives to say how to minimize your stuff. Don't advertise, but shared like maybe past stuff, do different things of how you actually do posts and everything. And the company should also do that as well, where they're not doing too much but doing a lot of posts with that. And the other thing I think would be good too is, you're always looking at threats, but I don't think it'd be that big a deal to get a security guard or two when there's something credible, into that.
oh, when there's something credible, absolutely.
I don't think this would be a case in that,
Right.
But
that's an adjacent learning.
But along those same lines, though, and forgive me if I don't remember the situation correctly, but he was alone, right? But there's got to be some
6:30 in the morning. He was
situational
walking
awareness
from the hotel he was staying in to the hotel where the meeting was at.
Okay. Maybe some sort of situational awareness that you're in an industry that could be in out of favor. And is it practical to walk around with a security guard? Probably not, right? But if you got other areas of the country that
sure,
a senior executive
you're
can
like
have
Manhattan,
24/7 armed guards, right?
Yeah. But I don't know. Like I think if
even in that situation, even if a guard was with him, who knows if it would actually made it? It might have made a difference because he could only fire one bullet at a time in his hand.
And does one other person there take away that bravado of somebody to approach and do? I don't know. I've never had
maybe.
that thought.
And then this gets into all sorts of psychology and like how motivated is someone to do the thing, and like
Right. From everything I'm hearing and reading, this person was quite motivated and had made.
You took a bus from Atlanta? Yeah, Atlanta all the way up to
And-
New York. Yeah.
And there wasn't anything going to stop a determined attacker.
Yeah.
And this is a case where it seems like the person didn't care enough to stay anonymous. They
Right.
didn't take precautions.
Absolutely right.
So
Well,
when
he
you have
left his
somebody,
cell phone at the scene, even though it's pseudo burner phone.
Yeah, if you're not that worried about getting caught,
yeah,
you can be pretty brazen about how you go
right.
about doing
You're
it.
going to accomplish your mission, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, like, we live in a society. So when people are like, I'm just going to break all these rules all at once, like,
Yeah.
there's not necessarily like structural ways to prevent some of those things.
Yeah.
So, but as far as takeaways go, I mean, I think some of it is thinking about it in terms of, okay, is this legitimately a risky thing? I think executive training for a whole bunch of reasons
like
is
that
a good
idea.
separate
Yeah.
thing. That's probably
Including that social media training, just know where you're going to be and let's not tell everybody.
I mean,
Right.
if you want to pivot it into a thing that might have ancillary benefits selfishly as a security practitioner, like maybe don't use personal communication channels for business things, Mr. or Mrs. Executive, because that's not terribly uncommon, right? Where people are like, oh, I'm just going to send this thing from my Gmail account to this board member or whatever. Like, I mean, you try to consolidate communication streams and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, very good. So
What are we drinking?
Let's drink.
this is some delicious stuff. Eddie, you want to lead this through? You're the guy that
Yeah,
knows.
this is a Sauterne finished bourbon, right, from our Distillers Reserve collection. So the Distillers Reserve is our barrels that were distilled previous to Iron City Distilling being around, right? And so I mentioned to you that the single malt program is very important to senior level managers and our master distillers, a very fond place in his heart for single malts, right? So just exploring with finishing in different casks
Yeah.
and in different barrels, right? So this was 6 year in a bourbon barrel and then finished in a Sauterne cask,
Yeah.
right? Which is a sweet wine. So if you'll notice, it still has some of the gorgeous, like buttery, caramely, baking kind of bread
Yeah.
almost
Did
notes.
you say bacon?
The baking, like almost like a completely
Yeah.
like bread, right?
I like
But then the sweetness of the wine is
on
a
your
little bit.
description and everything. You had that it's on the nose. It smelled like fresh laundry and everything.
My palate,
Fresh laundry.
my palate is not necessarily the best. I don't know that I get fresh laundry, but I will say. So I typically like just a little bit of water or a cube for
to
mine.
open everything up. Yeah, absolutely.
When I had just a little bit of water in mine, I get so much like cocoa and chocolate.
Yes.
Like it really. I mean, and again, not the best palate in the world, but like that's what hits
Yeah.
me in the face.
I'm so suggestible too. If you tell me, oh, I smell bananas. Oh, bananas. That's right.
right.
So now I'm searching for fresh
Yeah,
laundry.
like, I don't know. I get tons of
You're
laundry.
having a stroke right now.
Does someone smell toast?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is excellent, very smooth going down.
Really nice.
I do taste the cocoa. As
I get
well.
like a
I
bunch
think that
of
was
cocoa.
actually on the official.
Oh, was it?
Tasting notes and everything. Yeah, but it's good. It like settles off into that like cocoa, a little bit of like floral sweetness. You know, with that, I think that's definitely the wine coming through and everything.
And it's a little. I like rye, so I like the pepper, like the little bit. But it's a little. It's peppery, neat. But it really like mellows out
when you
way
open up
quicker
a
than I
little
would have
water.
expected.
When
with
we
a little
tasted
bit
it
of water.
at the distillery, when we were picking this up, I actually asked what the rye
Content,
was
yeah.
because I got a little bit of spice in it.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it's a bourbon, which has to be mostly corn into it, I got like a good spice out of it. So I was
It was
wondering.
high, right?
I don't know, honestly.
She
Not
didn't
necessarily
know.
a high rye, but I suspect it's
higher. Yeah,
high,
exactly.
high in the mash bill.
Yeah, type of thing. So, cheers, guys.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Really
gentlemen.
good.
Delicious.
It's a good time to bring out a little gift I brought for all of you.
Nice Christmas time.
Gifts.
The holiday
that.
spirit. I got T-shirts, Iron City
Oh,
Distilling.
very cool.
Oh,
look
that's
at these.
awesome.
I didn't know
Thank you,
anything
Eddie.
about sizes, so they're all extra larges, but
Perfect.
feel free to choose a color that you particularly like.
So my rule with fortune cookies is I always take the last one, so you guys have to pick first.
What's your color there, Justin?
I don't care.
There you go. I'll go with this one.
Nice.
Brilliant. Love it. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
guys.
Look at this. And
Oh, this is so cool.
That is
And
awesome.
just to show here, it has a 3-chamber on the back. Very cool.
Ooh, look at that.
Do all of them?
Nope.
No.
Oh, Justin,
Justin.
That's why I picked you
guys
I picked first.
I love this. This is fantastic. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah,
We're,
thank
you know,
you,
we,
man.
all the attention that we can get, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
wear that proudly
I would-
throughout
I would-
Pittsburgh.
Indeed.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so what's next on the agenda here? We have,
Oh.
the one you dove into
Well, this
here.
was fun, yeah. Who's heard of the Google Willow chip, which is the new quantum computer that Google put together, and some of the stats. So if you don't know what quantum computing is, it's a function of being able to take all the bits and they can be in a state of on or off at the same time and somewhere in between, unlike your normal computer, which it allows it to do computations so much faster. And if you think about our normal cryptography, it is made to be able to last thousands of years. And you've heard this, like your password, if you have it strong enough and use the right encryption, won't be cracked for thousands of years.
Because the math
Because-
just makes there's so many combinations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so hard to, it's easy to go to the encryption, but to go and reverse it, very hard to do. So, well, what does the Google Willow chip do? Well, it takes computations and it can do these in under 5 minutes that would take a modern supercomputer. Now, this is the part that gets me, 10 septillion years. And so if you're thinking about what that means, 10 septillion years is if the age of the universe is 1 second on a clock, 10 septillion years would stretch that single second into a lifetime of countless universes repeated billions of times.
It's so poetic.
So thinking about that, it's like, what is
I kind of wanted Carl Sagan to say that.
A lot.
Yeah.
More than enough.
it's 10 trillion trillion years.
Yeah.
So if you look at all the zeros, it's 10 trillion years. That's what they've reduced with this chip to be able to crack or do computations in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so there's an excellent video. Hopefully we can put that in the show notes.
Okay.
That,
Yeah.
that talks about it.
So are passwords going to be irrelevant then?
Well, that's a good topic. In fact, that's
Everything
another
is just
topic.
public, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's going to know exactly where I'm going to be.
Yeah. And so, well, what are you thinking here is that, and the video is so cool. It shows how what they do at this layered set of this computer, it gets down to the bottom part.
Yeah.
And it's all these layers. And as you're going down through, this one layer hits this point that's like the normal cold temperature in Kelvin of the general universe and outer space.
Yeah.
And then they go down to having made this thing so cold that it's truly, in their estimation, the coldest place in the universe. And that chip is inside of that area with all this stuff because they need it to be so super cold to handle the stability.
Yeah.
And what they did to make this thing more effective is you have, now not a play on your name, but qubits. And you have more qubits you add, creates more stability on the way that the chip works.
And they actually said that was one of the big things with this chip is that they were able to reduce errors out of
Right.
this.
Provably so for the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And that was a big thing with this. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what does this mean for us? Well, in a positive way, we'll talk about the InfoSec bad things in a minute, but in a positive way, they're saying by the year 2030, nuclear fusion simulations might be possible to actually achieve that. The way they can do pharmaceutical developments, like the impacts it can have, the battery technologies that you can get to are you're just going to be there. But if you think about the cybersecurity implications, well, now you have, and what do the bad guys do? They break in, they steal your data, and they encrypt, and they steal that data. It's probably, some of it's probably encrypted. So what are they doing? Well, the big thing people talk about, they're sitting on that data until which time it can be cracked in the future because of quantum computing. And so now, what are your big risks? What do you have to worry about? You have to worry about your threat assessment is what data may have been stolen what's in that encrypted data stores,
Yeah.
and what could happen now if somebody's able to actually do this in 10 years. So what data could have been stolen that in 7 to 10 years from now, if it's decrypted,
Is
can
still damaging.
be damaging.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I told you guys at the beginning of this that I was going to be the naysayer this whole podcast. So I think this is super cool. I don't think your typical scammer has access to the coldest place on earth or the technology to build this
They're
chip.
not Google.
They're not Google. So to me, part of this risk equation is like, is it going to be actually commoditized in 10 years, right? And some of that's going to depend on, okay, who's using this for
I think
what?
I'd be close.
You think? Commoditized.
I mean, following Moore's law and everything, that's where things move faster than what you anticipate. I get it, and I think there's a big hurdle because nobody's going to have absolute zero computers running in their house. They have to find a way to actually have this at a room temperature, before it goes to the consumer level.
Yeah, I think that's fair. When I was thinking about this, I don't know why, but in my head, I started thinking about like DKIM for email, right? Introduced 20 years ago. It's every company you know using DKIM.
No, they're still not doing it. It's
They're
one of the
still
first
not
things
doing
we look into.
One of the first things. I suspect that this technology, it's going to get out there. People are going to do quantum encryption of things, right? There's going to be quantum decryption at the state secrets level, right? There's going to be all sorts of like political stuff with this. But I think from an actual corporate perspective, and again, no one employs me to own a crystal ball. Like I'm not necessarily great at that. But if I had to guess, I think this is going to go the road of DKIM to a large extent, where specific things that need to be protected in very specific ways route through. I mean, it's like quantum Zix mail or whatever, right? In the future, but like for the most part, I don't know.
So you're thinking it's going to be the cloud service providers that will have a server you can rent or buy.
If it's commoditized in 10 years, it'll probably take 40 years for the security around it to be commoditized.
Well, what I'm thinking is, forget commoditization. I'm thinking nation states who are going to be able to do this, like Russia, China.
Yeah.
They have the ability to afford it. I mean, if Google can do it,
Yeah, for sure.
they'll be able to do it.
And China, was trying to get onto this as well.
And are they going to be the ability to do it and to potentially sell it to
The highest bidder.
organizations that can pay for it?
Keep in mind, not all encryption algorithms have the same effect on quantum, with that.
That's true.
So
Absolutely.
the ones that are at biggest risk are like the RSA, Diffie-Hellman, those type of public-private key implementations. So in that, if they trapped a communication between two servers, that does the key exchange securely. But then you go into a AES, encryption, and that's actually resistant to quantum with that. So if you just have something AES encrypted, that's not necessarily going to be beneficial.
The math matters.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of different, and I'm not an encryption expert by any means, but the algorithm matters depending on like whether it actually does better.
Well,
on
NIST
it.
recently released certain
Quantum resistant crypto.
Yep, exactly. And one of the things I nerded out on is what they're called and the names and the back ends of that. We'll get to that in a minute. But if you look at what other companies are doing, like Apple already is starting to employ things because they have what's called the PQ3 protocol, which is a post-quantum cryptographic protocol for iMessage. And it's designed to withstand future quantum-based attacks.
Yeah. And I think that type of thing is what's going to drive consumerization faster than anything else. Large organizations that are thinking forward and pushing it into things. So then it becomes a differentiator. So like, oh, I'm on Android and I don't have this or whatever. Okay, maybe it becomes a thing. But ultimately, I just put myself in the head of these security professionals that are like, hey, executive, I need X dollars so we can be post-quantum secure. And then you go, what?
Right, but here's why it matters now, is because banking and transactions.
100% agree.
And if you're a CISO and you are, you're likely going to get the question, because your CEO is going to be on the airplane reading the magazine, will see the article, is going to come back and say, what are we doing? But you need an answer.
Yeah. So when you say before about like, oh, what's your risk profile for data that might have leaked before and something like, I do think there's probably going to be a bomb at some point that goes off or like slowly goes off in terms of, data explosion for fairly old data, and maybe that's damaging. But I think the bigger thing to your point is like banking, healthcare, so people know where like the class 1 drugs are and are not, like all that stuff.
So
Even government
are you-
information that was already
for
stolen.
sure.
So are you saying that regulatory and compliance will actually be the ones actually pushing this at the end?
Dude, I was gonna drop this grenade and then walk away conversationally. Think about the privacy regs, right? When privacy regs are like, oh, you're not like really securing these people's private information because it's not
Well, what
quantum
we used to be
resistant.
able to get away with is...
Well, they just say strong cryptography.
Right.
And that's it. But then again, it comes back to who's pushing that definition. What does it mean?
As defined by NIST, who says it's post-quantum now.
Yeah,
or
right.
Like, I
Exactly.
mean, there's stuff like
Well,
that.
real use case. So you get your data stolen.
Yeah.
And if you can actually find a way to prove that the data that was stolen was all encrypted with strong cryptography, you have the ability to, with lawyers' help, to not contact that attorney general.
Yeah.
To
Yep.
not
Right.
do the disclosure because it is your safeguard. So, well, what happens now? At what point does somebody say, well, it was stolen, it was strong encryption, define strong encryption,
Right.
was it quantum safe?
Yep. And this is why I think what you said is right in terms of, well, there's going to be a bunch of like industry definitions of like, oh, you're dealing with this. And I think, I could be wrong about this. Please don't beat me up too hard in the comments if I'm wrong. I do think that some of the, like the FFIEC or the NYDFS or some of the financial regs have said recently in their like, hey, you got to do risk assessments. Some of them have started to talk about like
Quantum?
start thinking about, not like do anything.
I'm trying to think if there was any publications.
I thought
I'd have
there
to,
was. I
yeah.
could be wrong.
Yeah.
Again, this is like a bit
I know
of a
they
stretch, but
did
I
it
thought there was some.
on AI and some of this stuff.
That's true too.
But
could be
I'm not
mixing
sure
up.
they did it on quantum. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
So
thought
thinking about some of NIST's protocols,
Yeah.
one, they call it crystals. And crystal stands for cryptographic suite for algebraic lattices. And so I totally nerded out
It's very
on
clever and very good.
like lattice math.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, lattice, they're complex, highly dimensional mathematical structures, extremely hard for both classical and quantum computing to solve. And they're made for, basically doing this. So if you were to think about like a multi-dimensional haystack, okay? So picture a haystack with millions of points and finding the smallest needle, like the most pinpoint needle, which would be like the shortest vector,
Analogy.
or understanding this. So that all depends on understanding the exact structure of that haystack, which is practically impossible at knowing the blueprint already. So the way that the quantum proof algorithms will work is they use this multi-dimensional pinpointing math, the lattice math, and try to navigate encrypting something. You can do it because you know the roadmap, but try to figure it out without the map.
Right.
It's nearly impossible. So that's why quantum computers are still not able to break this stuff. And so there's a couple different algorithms that NIST has said are good, and it's called crystals dash. One is Kyber, and the other one is dilithium. So that got me thinking, like, where these names come from?
It's very
and
clever.
Kyber, where have I heard that before? Well, Kyber crystals are what your lightsabers are made of.
You know what your everyday lightsaber?
Yeah, it's
Typical.
made of kyber crystals. And it's also what the Death Star uses to power the super laser. And so you think about it from that perspective. So the name reflects the algorithm's role in being a powerful, reliable tool to defend against quantum computing threats. So just like a lightsaber helps you defend. The other one goes to the other side of the world.
Dilithium.
So dilithium. So if you're not a Star Wars fan, maybe you're a Star Trek fan. And the dilithium crystals are what they use to power the warp engines, right? And so these are the two things. So hop on ChatGPT, Google about or put in some questions about the algorithms that are naming. You'll get some fascinating information.
They're very clever in the naming.
They actually found trilithium in an episode of Voyager once. FYI.
There you go. Did it make the starship go 3 times as fast?
Oh, it went past the warp 10, and then they like de-evolved or evolved or something like that. Yeah, it went into something weird.
We'll have to look that up later.
Yeah,
So, well,
you can tell which one I lean to.
there you go. You like the Star Trek?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, look at what Google did. Look at the video.
It's pretty cool.
It is so fascinating to see them walk through. And these people, they have like the coolest jobs. I mean, that is just building the coldest place in the universe. Neat.
He has a pretty cool job too.
As cool as their job is, they're not making whiskey.
It's actually pretty warm in the Rick House.
Yeah, very cool. The opposite of the coldest place on
So not absolute zero there. No.
What do you say? 190 degrees?
80 degrees. And like
80,
at the top,
90 at the top.
90 to 95 at the top.
No, but you said you were cleaning stuff with steam earlier today?
Oh, yeah. So we steam clean all the gear after use, and so steam is like just under 200 degrees, right?
Yeah.
Over 200 degrees the steam is, but we'll heat up the inside of the vessel until it gets to about 200 degrees.
Not the coldest place on Earth.
Yeah. All right. Do we have time for one more?
Should we do a quick one? Super quick?
I don't know. I guess we're going to do a quick one. Do you want to talk about the password best practices?
I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
I think that should be fairly easy.
Yeah. So, well, what was the main point here is there was...
So this was years ago. NIST redid a lot of their stuff. We haven't talked about it on the episode here, but I get questions all the time, on this, especially with the antiquated change your password every, 3 months. Has to be,
because it's a pain in the butt.
3 out of 4.
It's
all
a pain.
that stuff.
You can't use the previous password, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot better ways, In fact, NIST for years now, 5, 6, 7 years, they've it's been a while since they updated 863B. And it goes through and gives very pointed, very reasonable advice into this. Some of it is make it a very long password. No matter what it is, make it very long, into that. That will disrupt most of the password crackers out there. Additionally, you don't have to change your password unless there's a good reason to,
Right.
into that. Like if this is the only place you've used this password, on this either website or corporate or whatever, and there's nothing to suggest it being compromised.
Why change it?
Type of thing. Which I think goes to a lot of it where, you get a lot of people that aren't as security savvy or anything like that, and they'll just they'll do spring 1 2 3 bang winter one whatever it is because it's constantly changing, so they go pattern based instead of something that they just remember into that. And it's funny for us, I don't know about you guys, like as a security practitioner for years, I've been every single time you use a password manager of sorts. And every single website gets a brand new password, randomly generated. I don't even know what it is, type of thing. There's only a handful of passwords that I actually know, like one's to my laptop, one's to my password vault.
It's like phone numbers I have memorized. Like there's not that many of them anymore.
And those are different,
Right.
type of things, distinctly different. And there might be a couple more into there, but that's about it. Like most of the passwords, like I have a whole bunch of clients I have logins to. You couldn't put a gun to my head? I don't know.
Right. So some of the main takeaways of this new 863B is, encourage longer passphrases. Mm-hmm. They're actually letting you or encouraging the use of emojis in there as well. And one of the articles, one of the senators said, "Oh, great! Now the poop emoji is going to be used as part of the password."
It's an addition. It's effectively additional characters, right? You increase.
Is that in the standard right now?
That's what they were saying is the ability to use different character sets from the
outside of the ASCII
Yep.
normal thing. That's interesting.
yeah. And funny thing, I was looking that up too. I'm like, was it always the poop emoji? Well, no, it's the same. It started as a soft serve ice cream because there's a vanilla one
And then
that doesn't
everyone-
look like
yeah,
that,
right.
and then you have the other one with eyes, and there you go. And then officially it got crowned as the poop emoji. Yeah.
It's just like language; it changes to do whatever people are doing
But-
with it. Yeah.
And then the other pieces of it is, definitely you need to be able to put the multi-factor authentication
Yep.
with it and passwordless technologies. So now you're starting to get to the
That's a
passwordless,
requirement.
which becomes better, but also introduces risk. So think about it.
Why does that introduce a risk?
Well, just think about when you go to your laptop. I was just doing something to log into something, and they said, "Oh, would you like to be able to log into this without a password from now on? We'll use like a web auth and the passwordless technology." And then what it wanted me to do is I scan my finger on my fingerprint on my laptop, and then it allows that to go
passwordless.
passwordless.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
I thought you were saying the password list.
Oh, no.
That's
Password-
another
Oh,
thing in
different.
the standard.
Oh, right. Yeah. You should
they-
have common
Passwords
passwords
X'd out, into
already
that.
in there.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
a lot of the implementations like M365,
Yep,
they,
that's
they,
default,
they
and you
have
can't
that.
turn it off.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, which is great,
Yeah.
type of thing.
So then I started really wondering, like, well, what's still the risk? Because at some point, you have a username and you still have a password. So the password becomes stored on your machine, and only the token then
gets passed back
gets
and forth.
passed across the network. And that's what makes it better.
Yep.
So,
Like
but
FIDO2 is a popular
Yeah.
passwordless token. I use that. Not too many sites. It's actually unfortunate. It's not an easy implementation on websites. I say easy. There's not like a common framework, into that. It takes work to get it into your app, with that. But I wish it was very easy because it's phenomenal, into
It
that.
is, but then think about your normal user behavior. This is what I was really trying to get into. Like, why does this matter? How's it going to help? Well, it's going to help only if you were going to remember that you set that up. So what am I going to do on a busy day? Or forget me, what's my
It'll
mom going to
remind you.
do on a busy day? And I go to, well, the risk is that you get a fake phishing website that's a lookalike website that you're going to go to, and all of a sudden it pops up and it says, what's your username, what's your password? And the last thing I'm thinking of is, oh, I set up that passwordless stuff, so I shouldn't be being asked for it. So my human nature is, I'm just going to log back in. So what's happening? I'm re-authenticating. There goes my password across the internet.
And just to plus one that, all these websites are inconsistently configured, right?
Right.
And so one of them might be not following the standards. Like, oh, you need to reset your your token's expired, or we need to reset your password, or for whatever reason,
Yeah,
we
need a
need you to
fallback method.
re-authenticate.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Which, is fine. But one of the things that any good password vault, worth their salt, they usually have domains associated with filling that in, type of thing. Worth their salt.
That's good.
So like if you go to a random website and say log on to your Amazon account and it's, Amazon with $sign as a Z, your password vault would be like, I don't have a password for this.
Oh, sure.
Type of thing. So all of a sudden it's off, like it's not going to suggest putting your Amazon password into a site that you haven't recognized before that you auth to that. So
Yeah. So if you're going to really implement this well, I think there's a lot of good stuff in this standard. It's really going to help. But you can't just, again, there's still residual risk. People doing human nature stuff.
Yeah.
The stuff is, where are the passwords stored? And now let's combine that with the last topic. So now what happens? Somebody gets on your machine, they exfiltrate the password store. Now they use their quantum computer and they crack it because they're not using the strong proof.
Well, I think one of my favorite things in that standard though is essentially like the do dark web searches or do compromised password searches, right? Because I think the value that has for organizations just to say, hey, there's a known breach associated with this username, or if organizations that are particularly evolved they're actually pulling, and I know like 2 of these organizations that are doing this, they're doing just sort of general dark web searches on user account names that could be related to employees. And so, does it match, Rick Yoakum, rick.yoakum@company.com? No, but is it Rick Yoakum at Yahoo? Well, it is, and that's compromised. And then they auto alert the person and say, oh, by the way, first of all, we saw something that might be a compromise of you. If this is your account, you should know about it. Second of all, if you've used the same password, well, you shouldn't have, but you definitely need to change stuff right now, and we proactively change things on your behalf. That's my favorite thing, is that, because it's extraordinarily impactful both for the company, but it also kind of helps your employees using your resources to look out for them.
We, when I was working at giftcards.com, we found a pastebin script that essentially took any amount of credentials, like email, password, and tested against 200 websites, including giftcards.com, at the time. So if there was any type of credential breach of anything, they'd run it all through these scripts, testing Walmart.com, giftcards.com,
I'm
Amazon.
sure it's like the 200 biggest ones with some financial...
PNC.com. It just went down the hey, I have a username and password, and I'm just going to test it all, into that. And they even set up in the script, they even set up test accounts to see whether their script was working. So they had you could actually see, and we saw on our side, they had an account that they set up with us that they used to validate whether they a successful login or not, type of thing. So it's mature. That industry, the criminal industry, they put a lot of time and effort into it.
But Joe, you always say well, what would the advice be? So my number one is if you're a CISO or someone that influences a space, if you're not doing just dark web or compromised password searches, absolutely figure out a way to start doing it. There's a couple, and then if you can level that up into also searching for similar named accounts, right, for your employees that aren't necessarily your corporate accounts, but hey, look, this is John Smith, you're John Smith. I don't know if it's you, but if it is, I'm going to let you know about it. That's super useful.
Yeah, that's great. So also make sure you check out the new NIST 863B.
Yep.
And if your policies and standards haven't caught up yet, your auditors are going to hold you accountable what you say you do, and you don't want to be held accountable to changing passwords every 90 days. So definitely update your standards, make it work, adopt what Rick said, and then take the things that Microsoft, Okta, these other tools build in to help you automate some of this stuff so that you can make this a whole lot easier for yourselves.
I know we're wrapping up, but I have that prompted a question that I want to ask you guys.
Do it.
So, okay, so we're in a situation where we say, hey, we would love to update our password policies, right? So, but we can't just make things harder. We have to give and take a little bit. Yeah, I bet you do. We have to give and take a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to make them more complex, but we're not going to change them, every 3 months anymore or whatever, right? So you're the CISO of this organization, and you're like, hey, I want to do this thing. And then all of a sudden, some compliance person or salesperson comes into your office and says, wait a minute, we can't change this because we have client contracts or we have these regulatory frameworks that might not be within your control, right? That are aligned to this old way, that have these password change expectations and stuff like that. How do you guys think through approaching the disconnect between sort of what's right and what might be compliant yet holding you back from that password?
First thing I do is scoping. And I would say if that's a system that I can contractually, legally not force getting to this better way, scope that, make my standards say that.
Carve to decide everything you're allowed to do, go do that.
Go do it, and then get with your lawyers and get on the phone.
Yeah.
Solve this problem.
I take even a more sleight of hand approach. Depending on how much they audit us, if it's a customer that we never heard from them again, they never execute their right to audit, be like, no, we're doing the best practice. Right. If it comes up, type of thing.
That's fair.
If it's more of a compliance regulatory thing where it is actually looked at, that aspect, that's where you just basically have to confront them, be like, because there's a lot of stuff like HIPAA. When was the last time it was updated? And not that it's specific to that level,
right? But I understand.
But to those standards and everything, you got a whole bunch of, especially federal stuff that might be antiquated and just not keeping up to date.
Yeah.
And when you can logically say, hey, this government body that's paid to give expert advice says this is the better way. Are you telling me not to do the better way? Type of thing.
I love that argument.
Yeah.
But can I throw another
Yeah.
inject into this conversation?
And who's signing contracts that specify exactly password standards?
Oh,
I've seen it.
I've seen it too, but
Yeah.
you shouldn't sign that. Type of thing.
But-
because again, you're basically like.
But here's why you do, right? Because you have lovely people like Eddie in his prior life trying to sell
They were
stuff.
badgering you until you signed it, right?
Trying to sell stuff, but no, or the other side, right? Eddie's at my company selling someone else on and saying, yeah, we're going to buy this thing, but only if you sign this contract, right? And there is a commercial dance that happens, whether it's right or not, right?
Yeah.
The reality, the pragmatic reality is that this commercial dance happens. And so
I just push back on that level of specificity, type of thing, because if you're gluing yourself to the floor and say, this is the exact spot we're operating from a security 10 years from now, that could change.
I'd say
agree.
take Justin's approach and then just push back and say, argue with me why
it's right.
I'm wrong.
It's just, instead of saying like we're going to change our passwords every 3 months, we're going to have good password practices implemented within the organization. And implement strong passwords. Like
I think
that's the verbiage you want. And multi-factor. I think you can survive off multi-factor, type of thing.
Yeah.
But again, you just don't want to, pigeonhole yourself into a thing that 10 years later, as we've all seen it throughout the industry, like it changes. And then.
Yep.
Then we have to adapt to that and whatever best practices. So.
And very little of it matters if you don't have good SSO. So if you don't have SSO, get better at SSO.
Yeah. Hey, this was awesome.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Gentlemen,
Thanks for coming out. Thank you, Eddie.
thanks for including
for
me.
the shirts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Definitely with all the topics we're talking about here. Tell us what you like between Star Wars and Star Trek. Star Trek is probably the better one. I'll get hate from that. And
Not
don't
for
forget,
me.
Yeah. And don't forget to tune in next time. Thank you all. Bye.
And we're out.
Gunzo. That was great.
Thanks, fellas.
That's awesome.
This is a joy.
That's what we do.
Great having you.
Yeah, but hopefully I brought a...
Did you think the links cap all the time? What did you say?
No, it's